Modus ponens.
Okay? And so we also discussed really how do we graphically show this? How can I show this in a Venn diagram? And we talked about the equivalence as well. If somebody says if P then Q, using an all statement, how can you actually restate that and it means exactly the same thing? With an all statement, how do you state it where it means exactly the same thing as if P then Q? All P is Q. Exactly right. This is an equivalent here, and you need to write this down because there are a lot of people who will say things like that. And if you don't understand their equivalence, then you won't really understand that they're really talking about the same form. Now, if I was to put this into a Venn diagram then, and talking only about the relationship of P and Q here, which one would I start with? What would be essentially the larger set that I would start with? Okay, so Q then would be this set, and if I'm saying all P is Q, and actually I would read it like this, because it's no longer an if statement, then the P part of it would be where? Right, it would be inside the Q. It does not mean that all of P, or does not mean that all of Q and P are the same, but all of P would be contained in Q. And then if I said, okay, the element that I'm talking about, either singular or plural, you see, is true. P is Q, then that means it has to be in here someplace, whether it's one, two, or many. Therefore, what can I say then about my conclusion? That particular element then must be what? If it's in the set of P here, it also must be in the set of what? Q. And of course, you can see that it is. Okay? Now, let's take the other one. If I say P, if P then Q, not Q, therefore what can I conclude? Not P. Okay, and that's called what? Modus tollens. All right, so let's put that as a diagram. Let's start with our Q, and let's start with our P. Let's put our P then inside the Q, and then we're saying it's not Q. Therefore, this particular element here must fall where? Outside someplace. So could this element here then be a P? Impossible. Therefore, you can conclude that not P is true. Okay? All right, that was the second one. Let's take the third one then. If A, then B. If B, then C. Therefore, if A, then C. What was that called? Hypothetical syllogism. Okay? Now, let's set it up. So with a Venn diagram, I've got A and B. So what is the larger circle? B. Okay? So inside of B, then, I have got A. Okay? Then the second one says, if B, then C. So what do I need to do? Right. All of B is contained in C. All right? Therefore, can I say then, if it's an A element inside this A circle here, that it must fall within C? And you can see that it does. Okay? Now, sometimes the only way you can figure some of these things out is by a Venn diagram. I want you to kind of practice this. Write things down and then practice it. And you'll see after a while it really becomes quite intuitive. All right? The fourth major logical form that we went over, A or B, not A, therefore what? B. Okay? And really, you don't know the relationship. If I've got a circle called A, and it's A or B, then what is the relationship that you know about A and B? Well, the only thing I know for sure is I have elements that are not in A. Okay? There's nothing to tell me that I have common elements. Now then, if I say not A, and I only have two sets, then not A requires that whatever element I have falls in B. You see? Then we went over some what I call deductive fallacies, and one of the most important ones, as you remember, if I have if A then B, if C then B, therefore many conclude if A then C, right? I don't believe we put this as a Venn diagram, did we? Let's put that as a diagram. And let's see how that looks. All right, so let's put it right here. So let's start off then. If I have if A then B, then what's the larger circle? B, and therefore A is contained inside of B. Then I said if C then B. So where's C? Inside of B. Now, what is the relationship of A and C then? They're both inside B, okay? So therefore, can I say then that A must be contained in C? No, doesn't follow. You see? Does that make sense? All right, so, yes, and this is called then the undistributed middle, and I do think that is probably the most important, common, what I call deductive fallacy that there is. Now, also, I want you to understand the truthfulness of certain propositions, because when we went over this the other day with women and head covering, a lot of things are asserted improperly because people don't understand the truthfulness of this proposition here. When is this proposition, when is it false? In other words, if I said to Jonathan, if you mow the lawn, then I will give you $20. When is the only time, or when is the times that I would lie then in relationship of A and B? That's correct. If he mowed the lawn, true, okay, and then false, I didn't pay him $20, then logically, this is a false statement. Obviously, if he mowed the lawn and I paid him $20, then the truthfulness of that is what? True, right? Easy. Now, the hard ones are this. What happens if Jonathan doesn't mow the lawn and I don't pay him? Did I lie? No, it's true. What happens if Jonathan doesn't mow the lawn and I do give him $20? Did I lie? Okay, so if he doesn't mow the lawn, can I give Jonathan $20? Yes, I can. I can give him $20 for any reason I want, just because I like him. Now, this is tricky. It is. I didn't lie. Okay, that's what it means. Okay? The only time I lie is if the condition of the antecedent is true, and then I did something and then I didn't do what I said I was going to do. The rest of the time, essentially, I didn't lie. I could give him 20, especially if it's false. This is the thing we have to realize. If something is false here, I can do anything I want and not lie about it. All right, let's take another statement. This is common as well. A or B. When is that false? Suppose that it's true that A is true and B is true. What is the truthfulness of that particular proposition? That's right. So if both are true, is the statement true then? Suppose I said, I'm going to town, or I'm going to go to the store. Now, if both of them are true, and it sounds like, suppose I did both of them. Did I lie? Logically, you didn't. No, that's called an exclusive or. And there are logical exclusive ors, but this is not one of them. Okay? So if both of them are true, logically it's true. What happens if I went to town and didn't go to the store? Then what's the truthfulness of it? It's still true. What happens if I didn't go to town, but I went to the store? It's true. What happens if I didn't go to town and I didn't go to the store? It's false. So the only time this guy is false is when both of them are false. What about A and B? Suppose I said, I'm going to town and I'm going to go to the store. Okay? So suppose both of them are true. Did I tell the truth? Yes. Suppose that I went to town but didn't go to the store, then what? False. What if I didn't go to town but I went to the store? What if I didn't do either one? It's very important to know the truth. Actually, you can prove many, many complex logical problems by understanding these three these three truth tables, as they're called, because everything almost can be reduced to these three truth tables. Okay, does this make sense? I mean, this is probably the most difficult one right here. Okay? And I have a lot of people who will fallaciously assert something. If Jonathan doesn't mow the lawn and I still give him $20, did I lie? And the answer is no. Okay? because the antecedent is false, I can do anything I want at that point, because the contingency of if A then essentially doesn't apply. So I didn't lie. All right. Let's go now to formal fallacies. I'm sorry, to informal fallacies. One of the interesting things that you'll find as you get into what I call, philosophical arguments is very few people know how to deductively argue. Very few people say, well, look, let's set up our syllogisms and let's set up our premises and see if our conclusions follow. Why don't they do that? They don't know how, and generally they don't want to. Yeah, because if your conclusion necessarily follows from your premises using deductive logic, they want to prove something that essentially can't be proven deductively. So they generally appeal to something that's informal, and it's an informal fallacy. And most of the time, it has something to do with an appeal to what? Appeal to what? Emotion or pity. One of the reasons why there is such a difficult time, I think, in believing that people have in believing that God would predestinate is because I'm telling you right now, every time I've had a discussion with somebody who claims to believe the Bible, I say, well, the Bible speaks about predestination, election, and their comment generally is, well, what if God doesn't choose my children? Now, what this comes down to then is their own particular emotional reason for believing or not believing something rather than what is the truth of the matter. You see. And fact is, I would say that when you get involved in especially politics, what do you think is the number one thing that politicians appeal to, you see, when they're asserting their political rhetoric? Well, the Democrats will always mention certain things. What is always one of the things they always mention? Yeah. Children. The subset of children is schools, right? Education. Therefore, education, right? And of course, the Republicans aren't for education. This is de facto what they're saying. They're really for education. Well, I don't know what that means, you see, when they say it, okay? But they'll talk about children, schools. What about old people? Are the Democrats for old people? Yeah, they are. They're for old people. You bad Republicans want to reduce. Now, when the Republicans say, we want to increase Social Security, which they do, which they have done for years and years, and the Democrats say, you've reduced Social Security, how can they both be right? The Republicans simply haven't increased Social Security as much as the Democrats say that they want to increase Social Security, and therefore the Democrats say that they've reduced Social Security, which means they've reduced the percentage of increase. Now, if you actually do this, and if you do it, since I work with an oil and gas company, if you actually graph this using a logarithmic chart, you know, which I'm not saying you should. This is kind of the way that the Democrats aren't smart enough to do this, but this is actually what happens. Then what you see is if you take these kinds of numbers and put it on a logarithmic graph, then essentially you're graphing the exponential function as opposed to the actual linear function. And so if you look at then at the increase or decrease of the Republicans, they would say, let's say they're increasing it by 10, and let's say these are actual percentages here. Let's say it's 10%, 100%, et cetera. And so the Republicans might be increasing at 10% every year, and so actually you have a flat chart. But actually, if you were to graph it on a linear chart, if you start off and let's say the average person getting Social Security got $5,000 for the year, what would he get the next year if he had a 10% increase? 5,500. So what you'd see then, okay, let's say this is first year. The second year then, he would be getting, and let's say this is $6,000, he'd be getting somewhere in half here, so the chart would look like this. But if you put it on a logarithmic chart, you see, it might stay flat. Let's say the next year he got another 10%. So he would get 10% of what? 5,500, you see, because it's compounded. So he'd get $550 more, so he would be getting $6,150, which would be here, you see, and so the graph would look like this. On a logarithmic graph, he's getting 10% every year, and it's flat. The Democrats, when they say the Republicans essentially are reducing Social Security, what they mean is they're reducing the percent of increase. But they don't ever say that, do they? Do you ever say, now, if you graph this on a log chart, then it comes out flat or it actually decreases, okay? Because if you don't get a 10% increase every year and it actually goes down, then you're actually going like this on a log chart. But on a linear chart, let's say the next year, the Republicans say, we're only going to give you 5%. So if you're 6150 then, and you increase it by 5%, where are you going to be the next year? How much more? Approximately 300 something bucks, right? So you're going to be at about, let's say this is 7 here, so you're going to be, see, it's going to come across like this. It's not going to be that angle, but you're still going to have a linear increase, aren't you? Most people, again, who are in the political world try to get their arguments across because of some sort of appeal to emotion. You know, again, they don't want to sit down and really listen to, well, what is the cause? What are you really trying to, what is the actual facts? They want to appeal to emotion. So the Democrats have got this, therefore, choice. Okay? Isn't it wonderful to be for choice? We're all for choice, aren't we? Well, the choice to do what? You see, instead of saying that, instead of using the motive term like, you know what, you're for killing unborn children, killing them while they're in mother's womb, then ripping them apart while they're in their mother's womb, and then, you know, sucking them out, you know, using some sort of vacuum. You don't ever hear them say that. What they say is, we're for choice, freedom of choice. And that sort of hides then what really is going on in the abortion, you know, clinics. And if you say, well, I'm for freedom of choice and, you know, I like children, they probably would object to that. Choices, and there's nothing virtuous about choice. There's only something virtuous about good choices. But they, see, what they do is they cloud this. Remember, what we're doing is we're talking about essentially informal ways, informal fallacies. And so when they say choice, they're really essentially just building a cloud here so you can't really see what's going on behind it. They're shrouding it with this golden concept of choice. And that's more important, you see, than whether that's a baby or not. Their choice is more important than that. Of course, many of the televangelists and others are all full of love, you see. God can't do certain things, or God wouldn't do certain things because of love. And so they'll say things like, God loves you and so do we, you know. Now, what happens, and you say, well, what does that mean for you to love me? When Jesus said, if you love me, then do what? Keep my commandments. He didn't relegate love to an emotion. Okay? This is what he didn't do. Love is not an emotion, unless you pick out one of the definitions of love that you want. Love can be emotional. Love is not required to be emotional love. In fact, if you take the set of all the definitions of what love is, what is love? Since this is the most talked about emotion in all of the songs, movies, literature, and whatever, it'd be kind of nice to know, what is love then? Honoring someone above yourself? I kind of like that. Now, if I honor somebody above myself, how do I feel about that? Exactly. Okay? Can be. Exactly. Now, obviously, do you think that the word love is an ambiguous term? If you were to look it up in the dictionary, how many definitions of love do you think there are? I'll bet you if you look in Oxford Dictionary, I'll bet you there's 5 to 10 pages just on the definitions of love. Excessive firing of neurons is my favorite. Actually, I got that from a book on the brain, and it was talking about an epileptic fit. Which what happens is when you start taking medicine for epileptic fits, is it actually retards the firing of neurons. Epileptic fits are caused because your whole brain becomes shrouded with just the firing of neurons. It's almost just like an overload of the brain. It just simply goes into convulsions, doesn't know what to do, can't think. So love then, if you only think of it as an emotion, you've already missed what most of the Bible says. Jesus doesn't say you have to emotionally love me, even though it does talk about what would be a good word in the Bible, especially the Greek word that tells us to do something that might be emotional about one another. Is agape. For example, in the New Testament, we have several Greek words. Agape, right? What does agape mean? That's charity. The King James writers, if I go out and I see somebody in need and give them the physical thing that they need, like their need of food or clothing, how do I feel about that? I don't feel anything. I'm just being charitable. Did they deserve it? No. What's another word that sometimes is translated love? Philios, right? And of course, there's a city. Which city is named after this word? Philadelphia, okay? Brotherly love. And I really think that is more like friendship. We actually like one another, okay? We're friends, okay? And then there's other terms that the Greeks sometimes used, eros. And what does that mean? Yeah, that's erotic love, physical love. This is what you would feel toward, hopefully, your husband or your wife, okay? So that can be an emotional love. But most of the time, the scriptures use these two words right here. Now, the nice thing is the Greek helps break it out, but the English words, somehow the translators didn't make that distinction. But the King James writers did. If you go back and read 1 Corinthians 13, which is what everybody calls the great love chapter, what word did the King James writers, the translators, use? Charity. He uses charity. Okay, so one of the most fallacious appeals that you'll ever see then is an appeal to emotion. Be very careful that somebody is not trying to persuade you just because of emotion. Okay, the next fallacy I want to go over is this. Appeal to force. Many people really believe things. Yeah, you believe this, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. No, I'm not. And my favorite story about this, and I put it in here, is it is in here, is the story when I was young. I think I was 5, and my brothers and sisters were brutal when it came to telling us the truth. I mean, I don't ever remember really believing in Santa Claus before really the age of, I guess, after the age of 5. I mean, it was. And of course, my brothers and sisters, they already knew the truth about it. So they came to me one time and said, well, I can't remember which one it was. There's really no Santa Claus. Now, it didn't bother, and I mean this, it didn't bother. Alan, do you remember this? I think you were with me when that happened. And so we were kind of sitting there just listening to them, and I said, really? It was almost like, matter of fact, really? They said, yeah, mom and dad buys the toys, and really there's no such thing as Santa Claus. Yeah, yeah. So he said, in fact, they showed us some of the toys that were in the closet. You remember that? I mean, and I said, okay, it's interesting, kind of, like this is like revelation, kind of a neat thing, how when you're a kid. So I go tell one of my friends, and I forgot what that kid's name is, and I thought, well, this is kind of neat. I'll go tell one of my friends down the street. Yeah, he was down. He did live. Was that his name? I'd forgotten his name. Was he your age? I think he was younger than I was. Well, anyway, so I came up to him. I said, you know what? X. Can't remember his name. I said, I'm a lot better with symbols than I am with names. I said, there's no Santa Claus. He said, yes, there is. I said, no, no. I said, your mom and dad, they go out and they buy the toys and stuff, and they give them to you on Christmas, and all this other stuff about Santa Claus is just not true. It's just, something they made up. I don't know how you articulate it, because at that age you don't articulate it like you do now. He said, yes, there is. I said, no, there's not. There's really no Santa Claus. He says, yes, there is, and if you don't quit saying that, I'm going to call the police. Well, I thought, I'm not going to hang around. I really was afraid, So, but but the one thing I didn't do, I didn't change my mind, okay? I knew there wasn't. But this is the same. Many churches use this. Many churches, the Roman Catholic Church, not only asserts things dogmatically, but for 1,500 years, well, probably not 1,500, 1,400 years, they killed people who disagreed with them. The reason you believed what the Roman Catholics believed many times, you think Galileo said, well, yeah, you guys have really convinced me of your argument about how the solar system works in the universe. Well, they threatened to kill him. So he recanted, you see. Then later on, of course, he unrecanted. But that's how many of your churches really and truly assert dogmatism to the point where people believe, because people are afraid to believe otherwise. Many people in the Roman Catholic Church can't go against the church. Many people in the Church of Christ can't go against the church. Many people will believe politicians, you see, because they're afraid of what, will happen to them if they don't believe them. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right. The United States, I think, the IRS does this. Oh, no, this is different. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute here. Okay? What happened to Randy Weaver and his family, I believe was simply this, so that you would be afraid of the government and be afraid to essentially assert, I think, even a rightful position that you might have, but you're afraid to do it because of the consequences that could happen. All right. Appeal to the people. Bandwagon. This happens all the time, especially with kids. What do I mean by appeal to people or bandwagon? Yeah. Everybody's doing it, Mommy, so therefore I get to do it. Of course, Mommy's response is, well, they all jumped off the cliff. Did you jump off the cliff too? Y'all use that? No, well, you ought to, yeah. Yeah. Everybody uses that, Hey, but it's a good argument, No, we don't do things just because everybody else does it, you see? We do things that are right. And the kids don't understand this, because you can't always say, well, most people do things that really aren't right. Kids don't understand that. And so you'll find, but many, many, many people will do this too. I think that really what is the purpose of these guys right here during political years? Oh, do you know 65% of the people agree with this particular issue? Therefore, de facto, what they're saying is, you should what? Agree with that. Because if you don't, you're in the minority. Now, what did Jesus say about that? Yeah, he said, okay, here's what we've got here. Putting it in terms of our modern expressway system, okay, here is modern mankind, with 4-lane highways going both ways. Actually, let's say 8 lanes, and it's going straight to hell. Okay? And then you have those who are getting to heaven, and the straight means a difficult, narrow, and even obstacle. This is something you need a 4-wheeler drive, okay? You better have your Cherokee Jeep ready to go through this. We don't believe things just because it's popular. In fact, if it is popular, probably it's wrong. I'll say it right now. I mean, I just think of something that which most people believe, and what most people believe is generally wrong. And I'm talking about in the spiritual sense. And I should think so that probably in scientific sense too. All right. Then you have those who really can't refute your argument. So what do they do? What do they attack? All right. Attack the person. And what is this called? Add what? Right. H-O, is that right? H-O-M-I-N-E? H-A, no, homonym. H-O-M-I-N, H-O-M-E-N. That's it. Added a couple syllables. There we go. Means attack the person. How did really the scribes and Pharisees attack Jesus Christ? Did they refute his arguments? Did the Sadducees refute his argument? What did they end up calling Jesus? You have the spirit of what? Beelzebub. You see? In fact, they're saying you're demonically possessed. They could never beat him in any argument. He won every argument, and so they just started calling him names. Oh, and I still, you hear good conservatives say, well, David Koresh really had done some terrible things. He had, molested all those young girls and had all those illegal weapons and stuff like that. They never found any evidence of that at all. None. They had to, but when they got through demonizing him and then went in and killed every person that was still in that compound that was left, except for, I think they said a few did escape. I don't know that for sure, but right. Yes, I do. Were they in the compound at the time that the attack started, though? Yeah. Okay. The American people readily, you see, accepted, in a sense, the public verdict against the Davidians because the media had demonized them. Now, what did Adolf Hitler do? Demonize the Jews. Exactly. What's happening right now? What group of people is probably the most demonized group of people in this culture today? White Christian males. No doubt. The old patriarchal white Christian male is now the demon of this culture. Now, the purpose of being PC, politically correct, is so that you can suppress any kind of opposing viewpoint. That's the purpose of it. Then, what you do then is you're allowed to say anything you want. Okay? Which is always against these very people we're talking about, i.e. white Christian males, you see. So, it's amazing how incredibly effective this has been. Today, we have more restriction in the speech in our major universities that are called liberal institutions of learning than we've ever had in the history of the United States because of really the feminist movement and the homosexuals. Christian fundamentalists, then, they have the same kind, it now has the same kind of negative connotation as the Muslim fundamentalist, which means they're rabid killers, who have no reason for doing anything they do except just striking out and killing people who they capriciously want to kill. And now then Christian fundamentalists are supposedly the same type of people. You see? And actually it's an undistributed middle. They do the exact, you're a fundamentalist, i.e. Muslim, you're a fundamentalist, i.e. Christian, therefore you're the same type of person. Undistributed middle. Why would we care what these environmentalist groups say? They're the ones that have essentially put California at risk right now. It's one thing to say, I don't like for people to be able to go out and essentially pollute, common property, the rivers, etc. And we need to be careful because you know what happened in Russia? Russia was never technologically as advanced as the United States, but they have pollution that may be 100 times worse than we have it because they never cared about polluting where they polluted anything. The United States needs to be concerned about pollution, but not to the extent of those people. Everything you do will cause pollution to some degree, but it can be controlled, and we ought to do that. But they're so nutty, now that, like I said, California and New York are at risk, of having major blackouts. That's, and it's really the environmentalists that did it. Straw man. What is a straw man? Right. You say, Jeremy, because you're a Christian, you believe this and you believe that. And then what I do is I proceed then to essentially break down or defeat my assumptions about what I think a Christian is. In other words, I'm telling you what you are by setting up a straw man, and as the old saying goes, then I proceed to knock the straw man down. Okay? Jonathan, you believe in eternal security? Therefore, you believe a Christian can do anything they want. and really, the sad part is that's true. It's just that Christians believe that we do anything we want, but what we want to do is honor God. There's a huge difference in the way that they perceive it. It's one thing that I think our dad ever instilled in me was, you never told Dad what? You never told Dad what? One thing he always used to get furious about. What was the main thing what he thought? Never tell him. He said, well, Dad, you think this way. He would come unraveled when you said that. Tell me what I think. Okay, what do you think? And then, let's discuss then what you think. All right? But a strong man, you essentially can set up what you think somebody else is thinking, you assert it publicly, and then you proceed to essentially defeat that argument. Not their argument, but that argument. That's what straw man is. And by the way, I use this all the time. I mean, it's a great way of, because most people don't know what you're doing. I like to use every one of these, in fact. The reason is because most people are too dumb to know you're using fallacious arguments. It's fun to do it. It's like cheating in chess. It's fun. Well, anyway, I want to tell you that. You don't have to. This is a good way to practice, though. The fact is, by doing this every once in a while and then saying, well, look, that really was a straw man. What is it that you believe? Now, the problem is when you start asking people, what is it that you do believe? You'll find that they don't know. So you set up a straw man and say, well, here's what, if you're this kind of person, you believe this, and you proceed to defeat that argument. And the fact is, you probably know more about what that kind of characteristic is than they do. They've got a tremendous problem. They don't even know. They simply believe things at such a superficial level that they can't even tell you why they believe what they believe. You don't really, unless you get down and start discussing things and setting up philosophical arguments with people, you can't realize just how dumb people are today. They don't have a clue to why they believe what they believe. But anyway, straw man. I'm skipping a few of these just because some of them are slight. By the way, how many informal fallacies are there? You can make them up. One thing about geometry, I used to tell people this after I got through T. I said, what you need to do is as you go through and you start proving things by geometry, just make up your theorems. Because most of them are intuitive. And once you do that and start applying them, you begin to see that, if there's a problem with it, some contradiction will come. But you can almost just make up your theorems and axioms in geometry. And you're almost always right. All right. Appeal to authority. Now, this is the one that Rima was talking about. Give me an example of appeal to authority. Something is true because of a fallacious appeal to authority. Give me an example of that. Now, I didn't say that all appeals to authority are fallacious. That actually is not one of, actually has nothing to do with me believing it. God says it, it's true, isn't it? That's not a fallacious. If there is a God and he has all authority, then you can never fallaciously appeal to that. Now, let me say this, though. What if I said this? God told me to do that, and we don't have any way. That's right. And nobody can prove whether God said that. What do all the charismatics do? So, exactly. God told me this, and therefore, who are you to say he didn't? Therefore, you need to believe me, you need to follow me, you need to give money to me. That is fallaciously using God's authority. What we could do, though, is say, God said this in his word, and make application to that, and that's not a fallacious appeal. Well, what about this? What about advertisements? Do you ever see movie stars, sports stars, people who are well known, essentially soliciting and selling products in which they don't have a clue to what those products are any more than you do? They would, back in the old days, they would sell cigarettes. They would sell beer that they didn't drink. They would sell cars that they didn't drive. It's just money. Lots and lots of advertisements are essentially fallacious appeal to authority. I don't think so either. Yeah, I don't think he does either. Uh, when I start thinking about, I guess, what is the most commonly used fallacy, I would say probably emotion and fallacious appeal to authority as far as a general cultural thing. If you start watching people, especially almost any aspect, do you think politics, do you think that the political scene uses a fallacious appeal to authority? I think they do it all the time. I think it's like, well, John F. Kennedy believed this, therefore what? If you're a Democrat and a Catholic Democrat especially, you need to vote Democrat. What's fallacious, you see? I mean, it has nothing to do with really of whether or not the Democrat Party today is the same as it was 1960. Actually, 1960, the Democrat Party was much more conservative than it is today. Politics, commercials, advertising. I can remember Joe Namath. You remember when Joe Namath used to do commercials on pantyhose? Every day, I'm sure he does. Well, what does Joe Namath know about pantyhose? That was authority, you see, fallacious appeal to authority. This probably, I would think, especially in our culture as far as day-to-day stuff, I would have to give that the big star. I probably think that's used more than anything else. Now, it's not a fallacious appeal to authority, Joanna, if you say, kid, you better straighten up, I'm going to kick the crap out of you. That's true. See, that's not fallacious, But sometimes when people try to convince other people because of some sort of authoritarian figure who really doesn't know any more about it than you do, there's a lot of, suppose, for example, that there was a case dealing with a medical situation, and they decided to call a plumber in to give his testimony in court, or a movie star. Have you ever heard of these movie stars in which they play doctors and nurses, and then people will ask them medical advice? Are you familiar with that, Rima? You probably don't read the same sort of really classical literature that I do, like National Enquirer. They think that these people know medicine because they play doctors and nurses on TV. It's absurd, And some people, it's really kind of amazing how much of what goes on really, especially when it comes to trying to convince somebody, is done by appeal to authority. I'll give you a good example. Go someplace in which, and I'm not talking about an MD, not MD. I'd much rather go to an MD than somebody who's not an MD if I have a medical problem. If I need open heart surgery, trust me, I'm going to go to an MD. Okay? Just the way it is. But there's a lot of people who are doctor of something. And there's a lot of people who think that these are the only people really who can know certain things because they have this title out there, even though, especially in theology, a lot of them are honorary degrees. Wait a minute. Is Billy Graham's an honorary degree? I didn't know that. Well, I know he did, but did he actually earn a doctorate of something? He never earned one. I didn't know that. I thought he earned one. Yeah, I know he's got several honoraries, but I thought he earned one too. Huh. That. Okay. Last one that I'm going to go over tonight is, and it's one of my favorite, and we've already talked about this to some degree, false calls. I've got the handout. Did I get this? I thought I handed it out. I guess it's our Thursday study where they got the handout. Well, hey, okay. Well, next week you get it. They're all in there. I can do that. I can put it on glossy white paper too. I will do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll put the Venn diagrams and all that. I think the Venn diagrams are useful, don't you? I think they help. False calls. I love the old quote that I learned from Thomas Sowell in one of his books on economics. And when he said, positive correlation does not necessitate causation. And we went over some of this a couple of weeks ago. You know, if I say, the ratio of women's earnings to men's earnings is 65%. What are you supposed to deduce from that? That's right. The feminists want you to, of course, infer that men cause women to earn 35% less. What if I said the ratio of men's weight or women's weight to men's weight is 65%? What should you conclude from that? Men cause women to be smaller. I guess, I don't know. Because, and by the way, that's a very, very positive correlation. I have never used that. That was precious. That was so good. I have never used that. That is absolutely correct. It's exactly the same thing. It's like the same one where we talked about Abraham was rich and Solomon was rich, therefore God wants you to be rich. But they never use Elijah was poor and John the Baptist was poor, therefore God wants you to be poor. That is really good. That goes in my notes. That's good. That's good. Okay, so women cause men to earn more than they do. That's good. High maintenance women? High maintenance women, yeah. There's a lot of high maintenance women running around. And, like I said last week, what do you think the ratio is of people greater than 50 years of age and their earnings compared to men who are less than 30 years of age? What do you think the ratio of those two earnings would be? I think it'd be 50%. Well, actually, in this case, it'd be 2 because this is the higher one. But let's turn it back around. Let's do the inverse of it. I think that if you put the younger men over the older men, it would be 50%. So therefore, did the older men cause the younger men not to earn as much? What's the causation? See, just because, and by the way, this is a very, very reliable coefficient. It's very consistent. Take any kind of job you want, take any kind of situation, and you'll find that older guys earn more than younger guys do. Now, when you start looking at it, and nobody does it better than Thomas Sowell, and I'll tell you this right now, I don't think there's anybody in the United States who understands how to compare these things and what they really mean. Why do women earn 65% as much as men today. If I take children out of the picture and look at jobs that are essentially comparable, what do you think the earning power of women versus men is today? Yeah, they say now it's close to 98%. When children start getting mixed into it, then women start wanting to stay home, and they will actually major in things so they can actually stay at home with their children as their children are growing up, so they don't go into the who? Mike Johnson has a wife he's this controller at Chesapeake who is a CPA, and she is really quite bright. She stays at home and earns nothing because she wants to take care of her children. That's good. I don't mind that. Right. They are. Here are a few of them that I put down. I remember when I used to go, this was a number of years ago for my heart problems. Every time I wear my white shirt with red OU letters on it, OU wins. Do you have your lucky OU shirt? You had a lucky OU shirt, didn't you? Yeah, we all do. Yeah. Huh? It's pretty, yeah, yeah. Therefore, to make sure this next year that OU wins all their games, I will wear that shirt every game day. I stopped wearing it under John Blake. I realized it's fallacious, and it didn't work too well under John Blake. In the medieval days, here's a good one. There were many more Gentiles who died from the bubonic plague proportionally than the Jewish community. So therefore, if you looked at the ratio, there was a heck of a lot more, you see, non-Jews who died than there were Jews. Therefore, the Jews must have been responsible for planting this disease in the Gentile communities. Now, why do you think the Jews did not die as often as the Gentiles? How did the Europeans live? You see, they were filthy pigs. When they went to Japan, the Japanese were appalled by these people who got off the ships. They stunk. Japanese are clean people as well. The reason why the Jews didn't die as often is because they were clean people. They had all these ceremonial and physical washings that they went through. Hey, I put this down. I didn't realize it. Here's 3 of them I put down, and Joanna, I didn't mean to put this. I talked about this last week. Education test scores are going down for students. Therefore, we must spend more money on education. The reason I put it under false cause is you can't prove correlation between spending money on education because we've spent more money on education than we ever have before, and test scores are going down. There are other causes that probably are more important. That's not to say that teachers shouldn't make more money. Don't want to say that. But just because you put money into education does not mean the test scores are going to go up unless there's something else that changes. And I really believe it needs to change.